Afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Hopefully everybody's getting ready for the holiday season, and as we go into the holiday season, we start to think a little bit more, nostalgic. Oh, it was so great when we were in 2012 and looking forward to everything that was going to happen in 2013, and we look back 12 months later and go, oh, what a year that was. So what we're going to do today is really talk a little bit about what we saw in 2013. I've obviously got some observations and some opinions. Jaime has some observations and some opinions. We'll dig in a little bit in terms of responding and recovering from breaches, but again, that's a manifestation of a lot of the issues that we've seen in 2013. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what I expect some of the evolution on the security technology front to be in 2014 and a little bit beyond, right? So I don't want to call this predictions, right? I hate predictions because predictions without accountability don't really make a hell of a lot of sense. So I can get on here in December of 2013 and say, oh, the world's going to be totally different in 2014 and then into 2015, and very rarely do folks come back and say you were right or you were wrong. So, I'm not going to make specific predictions. I'm not going to put a percentage of likelihood into any of these things. What I'm going to do is give you a feel for how I believe the technology security technology is going to evolve across a couple of different patterns like network security and endpoints, and then security monitoring and management. Obviously, I know Jaime has a lot of opinions in terms of what is going to happen and really what are key aspects of making your security monitoring and management infrastructure a lot smarter moving forward. And then hopefully we'll leave some time for some Q&A so we can do Stump the Researchers because that is always a lot of fun. So with that, let me introduce myself a little bit. So I was kind of introduced as Mike Rothman. I am president of an independent research shop called Securosis. And basically I liken myself to a professional pontificator. And that's pretty much what I do, right? I talk to a lot of people all day. I consume a tremendous amount of information, both from the research community, a lot of the folks that are on the practitioner side that are actually doing it, and I keep a pretty close eye on the vendor community as well. So I'm kind of like an information broker in the middle of a number of different constituencies with one goal in mind, and that's to publish research and information predominantly on our blog that's going to help you do your job better, right? Do your job faster and hopefully make fewer poor decisions that will come back to haunt you. So that's the goal, right? So independent analysts, we're pretty deep and pragmatic, but at the end of the day, I do identify myself as a security person as opposed to an analyst or a writer or a publisher or pontificator or speaker or any of those kinds of things, which I also am. But, I think when you kind of get down into the core, I really am a security guy. So let's talk a little bit about 2013. Right, and really look back with a critical eye in terms of a lot of the things that we started to see. And I will start with this concept of the pendulum swinging back to security. And we started to see this midway through 2012, but it was really driven by a lot of the advanced attacks that we started to see. And we'll talk about that in great detail, both Jaime and myself, as we move forward. But, let me talk a little bit about this concept of being security focused as opposed to where we had been largely for the last, 7 to 10 years, which was really all about the compliance mandates, right? Oh, what do we have to do to achieve PCI? Oh, we got HIPAA problems. We got SARBOX. We've got GLBA. We've got Basel. We've got, any number of different ones. There's, a whole bunch of organizations out there that all they do is just map one compliance mandate, to a set of controls, and they keep a huge matrix to help you figure out what you should be doing from a compliance standpoint. Again, I think that driven by the advanced attacks that we were seeing out there in the environment, driven by a lot of the innovation that we're seeing in the part of the adversaries that we're facing, driven by a lot of new kinds of specific ways to, compromise devices and exfiltrate data, I think we've seen a lot of folks really focus much more on security now, as opposed to just, hey, put the controls in place, meet my compliance mandate, get my again, kind of rock, my compliance stamp of approval, and move on, right? Again, we're starting to see folks that really want to solve the problem, as opposed to make the auditor go away a lot faster. And obviously that ripples through almost everything that we do, right? Because with a compliance mandate, it's pretty straightforward what you have to do, right? PCI specifies 12 things. 12 requirements, you do those things, you're good to go. Of course, I think as this pendulum has swung backwards, what we've seen is that maybe we're not so good to go. Maybe we don't know exactly what we have to do, which means we got to start thinking about solving the problem as opposed to achieving the mandate. And that means we have to start thinking a lot more critically about our control sets. We have to start thinking a lot more critically and from a more open perspective about what our adversaries are doing. We've got to start leveraging the misfortune of others, and we'll talk a lot about that, and I know Jaime will talk a lot about that, but that's this whole concept of threat intelligence and this idea that by sharing information amongst a large group of organizations, you will more likely see all, well, not all, but certainly a lot of the attacks that are out there, and again, really help to understand what other folks are going through, hopefully before you do. Right, because listen, if you're in the defense sector, if you're a government agency, if you're a Fortune 50 bank or what have you, you're going to see a lot of the stuff before anybody else. But the reality is, if you're not one of those groups, then you have a great opportunity to leverage the information that those folks are seeing to take advantage of the fact that other folks are being attacked with things that you may not necessarily have seen yet, and hopefully get out ahead of it a little bit. And again, I'll say that sort of tongue-in-cheek, especially since I'm all festive and in my holiday gear, and maybe I've hit a little bit of eggnog before we started up the webcast. But obviously, you're not going to get ahead of the threat. But what we're trying to do is compress the time of exposure between the time when we're compromised and the time when we know we're compromised. That's a concept we call react faster, and something I will get into later on in the presentation. So let's talk a little bit about malware, right? So I'm just going to state a couple of obvious things, right? The attacks are better than our defenses, and that's obvious, right? Because any of the infrastructure, operating systems, any of the applications, we're talking millions of lines of code. And in millions of lines of code are clearly the opportunity to have some kinds of defects, clearly the opportunity to take advantage of these devices, clearly the situation where these devices can then be compromised. The reality is also that given the reality of the fact that many of our adversaries are well-funded, very patient, have access to tremendous amounts of research gear and the ability to really decompose a lot of the software that we're all using at a fundamental level, that means that their ability to attack you is probably better than your ability to defend yourself, right? Again, I don't mean to offend anybody here. Okay, maybe a little. But, for the most part, what I want to say is just the obvious things that we need to accept as security practitioners, right? Our attacks, the attacks are always going to outstrip our defenses, right? The attack surface is infinite. And the attackers only have to be right once. You've heard all of these platitudes many, many times in the past, right? So I'm hopefully not shedding new light here, right? And what I also want to say is that this stuff isn't going to change. So what we're seeing are attacks predominantly at a set of applications that we're seeing today, right? Browsers, Java, Adobe Reader, those are the big ones. Microsoft Office is still a major target on those fronts, and that's really the low-hanging fruit for a lot of these attackers, and that's what they're using to break into the systems. How are they getting the attacks to the devices? And remember, if we think back to the kill chain, you have your recon, you have your weaponization, you've got your delivery, and delivery tends to still look a lot like email, right? Phishing emails, certainly drive-by downloads, get folks to websites where they shouldn't go. Their browser, automatically executes code, and you're done, right? So there are a lot of different ways that the advanced attackers are taking advantage of defects in the software stacks that we're all using. And again, this stuff isn't going to change. And Jaime, I know that you do a lot of research, and your team does a lot of research into the malware that you're seeing out there. I'm sure you've seen some pretty cool stuff this year. Yes?
Yes, some of the things that I want to mention are, I mean, as you said, advanced malware is advanced, and most of the companies are not yet prepared to perform incident response and to detect those kind of attacks. But the ones that are prepared are not doing a good job from my point of view. So they're spending millions and millions of dollars on new technology, and the problem with this is that to fight against this kind of malware is not only about technology, but it's about processes, it's about humans. I mean, you have to train your employees in order to detect small changes in the systems that can alert of a potential compromise. And of course, you need a huge amount of money to invest on new technology that can help you detecting these kind of threats. On the other hand, I mean, even if you invest on these kind of technologies, most of these guys are doing some cool stuff that is actually being able to stop these kind of technologies to detect some of these threats. So this year we have seen things like pieces of malware and payloads performing very cool anti-analysis techniques, anti-emulation, anti-sandbox. So even if you buy this amazing sandbox technology in your enterprise, so if the bad guys are sending you attachments with malicious payloads there, and the sandbox is able to capture that payload and analyze and try to detect things, we have seen how attackers are evolving these techniques and are basically blocking those sandboxes to analyze those payloads, so making detection of these kind of attacks more and more difficult. We have seen, on the other hand, how malware is becoming more and more difficult to detect, as I said, so it's easily evading signature-based systems. And I don't want to talk about antivirus, but I mean, all of us know that for advanced malware, antivirus is not the right solution. Antivirus is required to block most of the threats that are out there, but for these targeted attacks, sometimes works, but most of the times, once the antivirus company is able to detect this threat and generate signatures, your company has been already compromised and your data has been already stolen. So that's the main problem. Then from a network point of view, we have seen how more and more advanced malware is becoming more and more quiet, and sometimes contacting the command and control server once a week in a weekly basis, until the attacker decides to use your system and to steal data or perform operations in your systems. And command and control channels are implementing covert channels using different protocols to hide the real commands behind protocols such as, VoIP, Messenger, and even Facebook, SSH. So even if you are able to detect communications to the outside, you will see a protocol that you consider is not malicious, and some of the analysts will think that traffic is not malicious. And then we have also seen a lot of malware using SSL with other custom encryption layers to make network-based detection more difficult. So once the traffic is encrypted and the analyst cannot, the analyst or the tools that you have to detect malware, network-based malware, are not able to decrypt that traffic, the detection of those protocols is becoming more and more difficult.
Yeah, you bet. And I think those are a couple of really good points in terms of, focusing on the fact that dealing with a lot of these advanced techniques, requires a process and additional training, and the fact that, folks don't come out of the womb, understanding how to reverse engineer malware, right? So from that perspective, it's important to always keep in mind that we'll talk about technologies because that's the easiest thing to do, right? But, security and especially dealing with a lot of these advanced attacks really does require a much broader perspective than just, what's the latest widget that everybody's all hot and bothered about from that standpoint. So great points there. Also love the idea in terms of, kind of understanding and tracking command and control a little bit more effectively, and how organizations can do that, because again, that's a key part of the kill chain in terms of once a device is exploited, actually communicating back to the mothership to understand what its mission is, and then ultimately to exfiltrate data, which is why network telemetry and a lot of the monitoring that you need to do at the network level are just absolutely critical to be able to detect a lot of these advanced attacks. So in moving on in terms of other things that we saw, and it feels like so long ago that many of the banks, especially a lot of the Fortune class, Fortune 10, Fortune 50 banks, were getting slammed by huge denial of service attacks. It just that just feels so long ago. Right? Yeah, it was maybe 4 or 5 months, but now that we don't see a lot of these, hacktivist-driven denial of service attacks that are trying to make a point, it gets back to the day in and day out fun of folks using denial of service to basically obscure the fact that they're doing all sorts of other attacks, right? So denial of service hits the mainstream. We see multi-hundred gigabyte types of attacks that really just melt pipes at every stage of the process, right? So if you're not using a dedicated scrubbing center, if you're not, kind of have some devices with pretty significant session overhead and session space in order to manage a lot of these specific types of attacks, your infrastructure will melt, right? So a lot of folks have gone to that specific point of looking at whether it's a content delivery network to front end their web applications, whether it's some type of scrubbing center to be able to shunt internet traffic onto the scrubbing center to get rid of it so that you're only getting clean traffic. Again, a lot of technology, a lot of services have emerged to deal with this problem. But what the attackers are doing is, of course, changing tactics, right? So volumetric is a blunt force instrument. It's like walking up to somebody and hitting them with a rock, right? You can certainly do that, and it certainly causes damage, but anybody with reasonable defenses can say, oh, this guy's coming at me with a rock, maybe I should move or defend myself in some way, shape, or form. Application attacks, and I just did a big research project on this, tend to be much more diabolical in nature, right? They're targeting the application stack. They're looking at web server weaknesses. They're going after specific devices and overrunning their ability to do field level validation. They're taking advantage of key capabilities within the applications like the shopping cart and like the directory or search capabilities. All of these focused on consuming server resources to, one, either cost the organization money, or two, impact the availability of the specific application. So again, denial of service isn't just getting hammered with a tsunami of traffic as is shown in the picture. It's also really having somebody target your applications to knock them down. So that's clearly a trend that we saw in 2013. And again, I don't think it'll be as front and center as we move forward, but it's certainly going to be a tactic that tends to be used as part of a multifaceted attack. So let's also talk about the cloud, right? Because when we look back at 2013, and we've been talking about the cloud for years, but when we look back at 2013, I think we're starting to, if you follow the hype cycle model, starting to get towards specific use cases where the cloud is much more useful to a lot of organizations, right? It's really been a science experiment for a long time, but now you have the systemization of software as a service, so obviously SaaS being in there and everybody, very few people have issues, kind of using SaaS nowadays, whether it's for CRM or ERP or human resources or service management. There are all sorts of different, very common business functions that are automated and delivered via software as a service now. So that is accepted, right? But also keep in mind that a lot of your very critical data is up there in the cloud, right? So it's out of your control. It's not within any place you can see. You can certainly talk to your SaaS vendor and figure out, hey, what are you doing to protect my data? You can certainly get that feeling, warm and fuzzy feeling inside that they are going to protect your data, but at the end of the day, you can never really know. And that's just SaaS, right? In a SaaS world, the service provider or the software provider is responsible to deliver all of the security capabilities as a service, right? They take your data, they're warranting the fact that they can protect your data, and they put the right controls in place to ensure that that happens. On the other end of the spectrum is infrastructure as a service, and you know, companies like Amazon Web Services and Rackspace and Savvis and Terramark, which is a Verizon business company. So there are a lot of different organizations that provide infrastructure as a service, but that's fundamentally different, right? You bring your own security to infrastructure as a service, right? So from this standpoint, this tends to be a lot harder to deal with because you don't know really where your data is. You don't have the visibility that you used to have when you had the data within your data center. And that's even been impacted by private cloud deployments within your data center in terms of where you can get the proper visibility, the proper telemetry from both the servers, which are now called instances in Cloudland, as well as the networks, which have been abstracted underneath a lot of these, kind of vMotion and other networking types of technologies, eventually giving way to a fully software-defined network. So how we're tapping these networks, how we're getting the information that we need, again, radically changing. This is an infrastructure disruption of the likes that we haven't seen since the mainframe model gave way to 3-tier client server back when I had dark hair. And I don't know if the picture, I can go back to the picture and show. I have full head of gray hair right now, and I've been in this business for 20-something years. So that was a long time ago, let's just say. So the point here is, as we look back at 2013, it really is the year that the cloud started to happen. Right, that the cloud started to become productive, that it became much more of a mass market type of function, and therefore the need to secure it is going to continue to become much more important as we look forward. So, and by the way, it breaks every rule that we know of in terms of security, right? Route everything through a choke point so we can enforce policy. That's hard to do in Cloudland. Not impossible, but hard to do. Right? Data is intermingled with a whole mess of other people. We don't like that. Oh, that's kind of how the cloud works. So again, there are a lot of different things that are fundamentally different from a cloud standpoint, a cloud computing standpoint, that really impacts how we do security. So again, we teach a whole 3-day course on this. It's not something we can cover in 10 minutes, but suffice it to say, it is something that when you're looking forward, you need to really pay attention to in terms of how is cloud computing going to impact my ability to protect information within my organization, and how is that really going to force me to evolve my security infrastructure and architecture to keep pace with that. So let me make another general statement here, being master of the obvious, as I am prone to be at times. We've talked a lot about technology, right? Advanced malware, we've talked about denial of service, we've talked about cloud computing. Relatively, these problems are somewhat manageable. Difficult, albeit very difficult, especially advanced malware, very difficult to deal with, but relative to some of the other problems that security practitioners are facing, they're kind of manageable. And by this I'm talking about the skills gap. Right, so I facilitate a number, 10 to 12 roundtables around the country every year. Sit down for a whole day with a dozen to 2 dozen CISOs, and the single biggest issue that they brought forward this year was not about technology. It was not about mobility. It was not about advanced malware. It was about the fact that they can't find the right kinds of people to do their job. Right, they just can't find folks in order to execute. So Jaime talked about, yeah, we got technology, but remember, it's a people thing, and those people need training. Unfortunately, if you can't find the people, you can't train the people, and really what you're looking for is what's kind of depicted in the picture here from the Blues Brothers, right? Magician. That's kind of what you need to be in order to do security nowadays. So we'll talk a little bit about this later on because it is a key gap when we think about what we have to do in 2014 a lot better than we did in 2013, and that is find the right people in order to execute on the security program that you're putting in place. And again, I'll just make the point again because it's that important. The security program is contingent and dependent on the people that you have to drive it, right? It's very simple. If you can't find those people, you are going to have a hard time executing on your security program, and therefore you're going to have a hard time being successful in terms of protecting the data that you're supposed to and meeting the charter of your organization. So let's talk about best practices, right? Let's talk a little bit about moving forward. Let's talk about best practices, especially since I hate the term best practice. I absolutely hate it, because that involves and infers that there is a generic answer to protecting information, and that's just not the case, right? There are things that you should be doing, and a former guy I used to work with, Dr. Peter Tippett, back at TrueSecure, he called them essential practices, right? These are things that are essential to do. Best, I don't know, right? That really depends on your organization. That depends on what you're trying to protect. That depends on what your attack surface looks like. That depends on what your adversaries are. So let me just poke a hole right in best practices up front, because I don't think it's a relevant term. And the reason I don't think it's a relative term is because what you do and how you do your security and how you build up your security program is very much dependent on the maturity of where you are. Right? So think about that. Maturity. Nobody wants to talk about, oh, maturity. Am I a toddler? Am I barely out of diapers? Am I an adolescent? Am I fairly mature? Do I have a whole head of gray hair like some folks I know that show, and a whole mess of road rash that have shown that they've been through the battles and the wars, right? So you need to be honest with yourself in terms of where your program is from a state of development perspective, right? Where is it? And also, pretty importantly, you've got to understand where you want to be, right? Not every organization should be world-class in security. Security is a drag, right? Security impacts somebody's ability to do business, right? Security makes things harder for folks because you're getting in the way, you're putting controls in place, making folks do things they don't necessarily want to do. So from that standpoint, you got to decide, hey, do I really need to be world-class? Could I just be industry, kind of leading? Can I just be, average, right? It's okay, right? If organizationally you decide that, you know what, based upon what I'm protecting against and based upon who I tend to be attacked by, I can probably be average and deploy those resources and divert that money to something that's going to make a bigger difference to my bottom line, to my organization's bottom line. And again, that's a line of thinking that not a lot of folks go through. Right? Not a lot of folks kind of say, hey, I don't need this much resource because security really isn't, something that we need to be world-class in. Think about that, right? Think about that. But the first job that every security person has is to figure out what value they're adding, right? So it would be great if we could just go to a machine that says add value for my security point. So when I talked about my CISO roundtables, I said point number one was that they can't find the right people. Point number two is that folks still have a huge problem and just a devil of a time trying to actually show the value of the security program, right? Again, remember, security is bizarro world, right? When nothing happens, we're doing a great job. Right? When things are invisible and folks can do their jobs and we don't have to wipe machines and their productivity isn't impacted and the availability of the applications is there and your customer database doesn't end up in Eastern Europe or South America, right? That means we're doing a good job, but nobody sees that, right? The only thing people see are when we're doing, when something bad is happening. So the point is, how do we get to a situation where we can show the value of what it is that our security program is doing? And a lot of it gets back to visualizations, a lot of it gets back to reporting, a lot of it gets back to not blocked attacks, but tracking metrics like dwell time, how long was an attacker in our midst, how quickly could we respond to it, how much data was lost. It could be records, it could be anything like that. If you don't have an activity, right, how many machines did you have to wipe, how many training sessions did you do? There are a lot of things you can count to show the value of your organization and of your security program, right? And those are things that you really have to focus on moving forward because, again, this is a challenge, right? Everybody knows advanced malware. Everybody knows, there are adversaries out there that can bust into us. That's old news, right? You're not going to get huge funding. You're not going to get, basically a blip in the CEO's eye unless you're able to show what that value is. And again, I think that that's a key area of focus for us as we move forward. And I alluded to this before, which is our concept about security monitoring, reacting faster and better. Again, stating a couple of other platitudes. Can't stop all the attackers. You better detect them faster. You better respond better. This involves monitoring, forensics, and incident responses, right? monitoring, forensics, and incident response. So when you think about threat management, you've got, kind of your attempt to prevent things, right? You want to prevent an attack or a compromise or an exfiltration to the greatest degree possible, right? That's what we're trying to do, because then we don't have a problem. And then in the real world, this stuff happens, and it happens pretty frequently, right? So what we have to do is get a lot better at detection. We have to get a lot better at investigation, right? And that means forensics. That means having technology and a process and trained people that can go figure out what actually happened, find the root cause of an attack, understand where that attack is proliferated throughout your environment. Again, I know Jaime will talk a lot about this when he talks about OTX and some of the things Alien Vault is doing on this front. But, again, as we look forward, we've spent years and years and years on the protection and prevention side of security. Right, let's see if we can just block these attacks, if we can, put and make it harder and harder for these guys to get through, and layers and layers of security. Listen, yes, we still need to do that, but the reality is we also have to divert at least some of our attention and some of our resources and some of our funding towards a lot of these monitoring, forensics, and incident response and detection technologies, investigation technologies, because, again, this stuff is going to happen. We have to be ready for it. So if you are a less mature program, right, you want to be average, within your environment, or maybe you're behind, right? If you're behind from the standpoint of being a laggard, what you want to do is simple blocking and tackling, right? Not too straightforward. This guy in the picture is having a little bit of a hard time with that whole walking, right? Walking before you run thing. But here we're just trying to get better at malware and attack detection. Right, we're looking at next generation firewalls and other ways to, detect and get more visibility in terms of the application traffic in what's happening on our networks, right? We want to protect our servers better, make sure that they're patched and configured correctly. We want to do logging and simple alerting so that when, we get a brute force attack or obvious recon or somebody makes a change that's unauthorized, that you've got some visibility here. Remember, this stuff isn't brain surgery. But a lot of organizations, especially the less mature ones, the ones that want to be average or by proxy of funding or seriousness or understanding of security have to be average, or the folks that are laggards, this is the stuff to focus on moving forward. Right? Yeah, we can sit here and talk about advanced techniques. We can talk about threat intelligence. We can talk about all sorts of fancy technologies. But if you're not doing the fundamentals correctly, right, if you're not blocking and tackling correctly, it's all a waste. Right? So these are the things that you should focus on if you're a less mature environment. If you're a more mature environment, what we want to do is focus on deeper detection. Remember, I kind of laid out this whole threat management thing. Prevention, detection, investigation, and then there's remediation. That's more of an ops thing, so let's focus on the first three: prevention, detection, investigation. Again, a lot of folks, have done a lot and continue to invest a lot in the prevention side. That's great. Right, so network-based malware detection is all about, maybe blocking it, but more importantly, detecting when you have command and control traffic on your network. Jaime alluded to that a little bit in terms of, the different predictable ways that some of these attackers are communicating with the botnets, and also some of the ways that aren't so predictable, right? Some of the ways that aren't so easy to track and understand. These are the areas that we have to get a lot better at if we want to be truly good at security, if we want to be truly decent at keeping the advanced adversaries at bay. Not that we can do that, right? But what we can do is, again, react faster, close or shorten that window between compromise and detection of compromise, and we do that in large part by, on one hand, trying to find malware on the way in, but on the other hand, making sure that we have a real good view of who my folks are communicating to. Are those known bad devices? Are they doing it in such a way that would indicate command and control traffic? We want to spend a lot of time on incident response and forensics, right? Because if you don't have the information, if you're not collecting and aggregating the data to allow a detailed investigation, that data is gone. It's gone. Right? If you're not capturing packets, if you're not, kind of doing significant amounts of logging, if you're not, again, looking at changes and differentials between different change activities and maintenance and operational activities on your devices, if you're not capturing this data, it's gone. Right? So what we want to do is first and foremost focus on what data we need to capture and then figure out how we're going to analyze it. Right? So what are we going to do within our incident response process? Making sure that we have a good and solid program to make that happen, right? A lot of folks don't focus on that. They figure, oh, we'll just call a third party and they'll figure it out. Well, it's too late at that point. You're still going to have to call the third party, let's be clear, but they may not have the data that they need, right? So you've got to make sure that you've got a process, especially if it involves a third party forensics team, to make sure that you're giving them the information they have so that they can, or that they need in order to be successful. You also want to focus a lot on threat intelligence. I did allude to that a little bit, and we're going to allude to that a lot more later on in the presentation, because that is, again, another key. The idea of benefiting from others' misfortune, the idea of information sharing across a widespread community so that you're exposed to attacks that aren't necessarily coming at you, right? So that you understand what the indicators are of certain attack types so that you can look for that in your environment before you were able to detect whether it's either command and control traffic or possibly exfiltration. Right? So these guys are getting a lot better. The adversaries are getting a lot better at stealing data, at exfiltrating data. Jaime talked about that. Finding those attacks, understanding those tactics, being able to look for those tactics within your environment are absolutely critical to making that happen. So what are we going to look at in 2014? Well, that's an interesting question, right? So let's talk about the network first, and what you'll hear a lot about is, again, as my Velociraptor says here, no matter the question, the answer is NGFW, or next generation firewall, for those of you not immersed in security acronym lingo right there. What we do see are a lot of folks that are continuing to look at devices to detect malware attacks that run on the network, right? Maybe it's a product that runs as part of your next generation firewall. Maybe it's something that's an adjunct to an IPS or intrusion prevention device. Maybe it's a standalone device that is just there to detect, and maybe explode and detonate malware on the way in. Maybe it's just looking at the egress traffic to see, and again, identify that command and control. We're starting to see, from a network security standpoint, a lot of folks thinking about how to consolidate those functions onto a common platform. Certainly the best and most logical device to be that aggregation platform or that consolidation platform is the next generation firewall. It can do threat management, which we used to call IPS. It can do this malware detection. It can do web filtering. So that tends to be what looks to be the consolidated platform moving forward. But ultimately, that's a device that I'm calling the perimeter security gateway, because it's more than a firewall, right? So just calling it a firewall kind of short shrifts that device. So that's what we're seeing in network security. Again, if you're more advanced, you definitely want to look at some of these network-based malware detection devices, depending on what problem you're trying to solve. Again, a next-generation firewall and a re-architecture could certainly be on your list of things to do. We're also seeing a lot of innovation moving forward on the endpoint. So there's these new tools called advanced malware protection tools, and it's not your grandpappy's AV. I'll call it. So the last point of wither traditional AV, which I love this picture, right? Because that's what most companies view the AV vendors as, right? Stick them up. I'm here to get your renewal money because from a compliance standpoint, you have to have AV. Right? So it's really, we know it doesn't work as well as it needs to, but I'm going to stick you up and you're going to pay me anyway, for the simple reason that ultimately, in order to get your ROC or your stamp of compliance, you actually have to have the technology in place. But it doesn't solve the problem, right? So as we've moved, as I said, first thing I said, right, where the pendulum is swinging back to security. So what that means is we're looking at new technologies to actually help us detect and block and prevent these advanced malware attacks. So whether it's an application HIPS, and these are tools that have profiled the big applications, browsers, Java, Adobe Reader, Microsoft Office. I explained those before. Those tend to be what I call the big seven. They've profiled these and determined what is good behavior and what is bad behavior, and then they can block that bad behavior. And since many of the attacks that we're seeing nowadays tend to be focused on those specific applications, that's been pretty helpful. You also hear a lot about isolation, whether it's micro-virtualization, and there's one company out there talking about micro-virtualization, another bunch of other ones that actually have, isolated browsers or virtual browsers that run in their own kind of little sandbox on a device, which is funny. I love the Alien Vault slide template, has that green border around it. Well, there used to be a company that did this, 7 or 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, called Green Border, right? And Green Border was actually an isolated browser to address a lot of these issues, but it was about 7 years ahead of its time. They ended up selling to Google for a couple of Starbucks cards, and Google promptly killed that technology. So actually, they didn't probably kill it. It ended up, pieces of it ended up in Google Chrome, I believe. But, suffice it to say, the Green Border guys were way ahead of the market, looking at it from an isolation standpoint. You also have whitelisting that's still in play, especially on server devices, which is, hey, these are executables. These are activities that these servers should be doing, and sometimes endpoints if you can lock those down. So we still see that. And I'll also mention this new concept that I'm introducing called endpoint activity monitoring, and that's really getting at a very detailed kernel level function of exactly what's happening on that endpoint. Because remember, anytime a device is compromised, things are happening, right? File things, system files are changed, registry settings, what have you. You've got to capture all that information because that tends to be your audit trail that then you can look for the compromise. You can figure out exactly when it happened. You can figure out what the chain of events was, and ultimately you can understand what either needs to be rolled back or, when you wipe the machine, you have a full record of what actually happened. So that's an area where I think we're seeing a lot of innovation, just all told on the endpoint. And we want to talk about, zero trust. We want to talk about, there's no way to protect these endpoints. We have to assume they're not trusted, and that is true. But that doesn't mean we don't have to try to protect these things. So again, these technologies, these advanced malware protection technologies are emerging to make that happen. So let me talk a little bit before I wrap and hand it over to Jaime about security monitoring management. As I mentioned before, right, when I talked about react faster and better, we have to make more investments in detection, right? We have to make more investments in investigation. Right, we have to do this because this is really the monitoring technologies. It's the only way we know what's truly happened in our environment. We want to aggregate data and information across the entire stack or up and down the stack, right? Down from the network at again, potentially packet level streaming information through the server infrastructure and application servers all the way up into the application layer to really get an understanding of what's happening, gather that data, profile that data, pattern match on that data, run analytics to figure out what are outside of those tolerances and look for anomalies because, again, I don't see a lot of other ways, given just the sheer number of different types of attacks that an organization can be suspect or can be vulnerable to. Ultimately, you've got to really look for what's not normal as opposed to trying to look for everything bad that could possibly happen, since that's a zillion things. Remember, it's all about alerting, visualization, and reporting, reporting being the least important of a lot of these technologies. It really is about how can I get an alert, how can this tool and technology add value to my environment and tell me something that I don't already know. That's the key aspect of that, and ultimately what we're looking for is something that's going to be threat intelligence driven. So I know what to look for, hopefully before it's being sent to me, right? Hopefully before I'm being attacked by it, I know what to look for. Again, gives me, you're not going to get ahead of the threat, but what you can do is shorten that window between compromise and detection of compromise. So with that, let me hand it back over to Jaime, and he can talk a little bit about what his team has going on from a threat intelligence standpoint and how it fits into their tool.
Okay, so OTS was an initiative that we launched last year to make it easier to people to share information about threats that they are seeing, and we like calling this crowdsourced threat intelligence, because we believe that the more you know, the more you can be prepared to both detect and prevent and also perform incident response in your company. So our approach is open and collaborative because we don't believe any vendor has the best security tool and the answer to all of these problems. So we believe on an open and free systems that allows you to share data with all your peers in the industry. So our system is very basic. Basically, when you are running one of both our commercial product, USM, or Ossim, that is the open source version of our product, you are sharing data with all the other peers that are running our product or our open source version as well. So if a user in Japan is detecting a web attack against their servers, the IP address of the attacker is automatically sent to the systems, and you are receiving that data in near real time. So next time your system is seeing activity from that same attacker, the systems will know that other peers have already identified as malicious that asset. So the system will use that information to prioritize that attack and also to help you during the incident response process, because you will have context and visibility of what else is doing that attackers in other parts of the world and to other companies as well. So the system, apart from collecting data from these products that we have around the world, from all the companies that are running this product, we also include data that my team is generating. So we, for instance, perform automatic malware analysis. So we extract command and control servers. We crawl hacker forums, and we use other source of external reputation services to improve that data that we collect from customers and from open source users. And we, our engine basically grab all that data and try to make sense of all that raw data and give you just the information that you need to know. So basically our engine is collecting and validating that that data is ready to use and ready to help you once your system is detecting activity from those assets. So some basic statistics. We have running this system more or less from the beginning of last year. So you can find around 200 and between 200 and 350,000 malicious IPs in a certain time. So if you just download the database right now, you will find around 200,000 malicious IP addresses in the system. So we have helped, our system have helped around discovering around 200 million attacks from last year. So that's not it's not just the number of events that have much data from our system, but in which times our system has been critical to detect an attack that maybe the IDS or the IPS wasn't able to detect. We have an average of more or less of 11 million IP addresses a month. And some basic statistics are the system already had 20% of the live APT1, of the Mandiant APT1 report domains. So we already had 20% of those domains in our OTX systems even before Mandiant released the report. So that activity was being seen by different peers around the world that were sharing that data within the system, and our system was giving that threat data to all the other peers around the world. So how do our system use that OTX, that threat intelligence that the OTX framework is able to give you? So basically we believe that you need the basic capabilities that our product is able to offer in a single console. So we have been, for the last hour, we have been talking about all these new technologies, all these new capabilities, prevention capabilities that should help you preventing attacks. But as Mike said in most of the last hour, is that those prevention technologies are not working as well as we expected. So we have to rely on detection capabilities. So our system is basically being able to give you the basic detection capabilities that makes you able to perform all this security intelligence and all this detection, incident response, and sharing of this data. So basically our system have 10 to 20 different tools that are able to give you information about your network. So once you plug our product, the system is assessing information from the devices that are running in your network, the inventory that is running on those systems, the software that is installed, the vulnerabilities that are present on those systems. So then when the system is able to find threats in your network using passive network intrusion detection systems, NetFlow data, information from the log sources that the system is able to collect and so on. Once the system detects an active threat or exploit in your network, is able to use that information that the system collected about assets in your network to give you more accurate detail about what's going on. Then the system helps you responding to those incidents. So the main advantage is once you have all this information in the same console, you are basically, it's very easy to just detect, take a look to an alarm, and in the same console being able to find which vulnerabilities are present on that system, which software is running in that system, which other systems are communicating with the assets. So in that single console, you can have all the information that you require to perform incident response in your network. And once again, the last piece of all this is that when the system has detected a new threat and you have responded to the incident and you have deployed all the measures that you need to deploy in order to block that threat, the system automatically is sharing that data with other peers. So that information is very helpful for other people that are seeing the same threat in their companies. And then very quickly, this is an example of the process that you will follow to detect and perform incident response of an incident in your network using our product. So we are seeing a basic alarm where the system is telling us that a brute force attack has been running against one of our systems, a Linux machine in your network. So very easily you can identify that that malicious IP is in the OTX database and that other users are also seeing the same attack from the same IP address going on against their systems. So you can easily have all the information that you require to perform incident response on that attack in the same console. So you can see all the ports that are involved, all the IP addresses that are involved. You can easily click and see the details about the events that has been generating this alarm in your network. You can, in the same console, you can check the vulnerabilities that are present of that system. So basically, you can guess if the attackers are trying to exploit one of those vulnerabilities to gain access to your systems, or you can basically try to determine if you should respond very quickly to that incident, because maybe if the users have gained, if the attackers have gained access to that system, can quickly exploit another vulnerability to gain access to other systems in your network. So then once you have that information and the system is alerting you that other users are also seeing attacks coming from the same IP address, we offer you the possibility of talking to your peers. So basically, you can use the same console to check what other people are talking about that IP address or about that IOC. So you can ask for more information. You can talk to them. So you can review how other people are trying to prevent that threat from going on their network, and you can also help them to and put more details and more comments about how you prevented that threat from in your network. Another key thing in the system is that we believe, I mean, most of the big companies and the big enterprises have big security teams that maybe 20, 30 people that are running security in that enterprise. But what happens with the medium and small companies? I mean, they don't, as we have been saying in the last hour, one of the big problems for this year is that we don't have enough resources. We don't have enough people that are trained and that are security experts that can run this system and that can help you detecting and preventing these kind of threats. So we believe that security systems should be easy to use and should be easy to understand. So one of the key pieces of our system is making security easy. So we give you all the step-by-step guide to respond to a specific threat and to a specific incident. So the skill sets that you need in order to respond to that incident is less than with other tools, because we guide you through the process step by step. And then once again, we give you the possibility of very easily share that information that your system is seeing with other peers. So in the same console, if other systems are seeing the same attack, you will be able to read that feedback from them. Okay, so very quickly, as we said, our Alien Vault USM delivers unified and coordinated security monitor for incident response and compliance management, giving you the basic capabilities that you need to perform these tasks. Alien Vault Labs, that is the team that I run, provides coordinated intelligence analysis of the latest threats and guidance on how to respond to these incidents. So we not only give you the IOCs and the bad list of things that the system should alert on, but we also give you a step-by-step guide of how to detect and how to prevent those threats in your network. And once again, the OTX, the Alien Vault Open Threat Exchange, offer real-time insights on incidents affecting others that may impact you, so you can deploy a preventive response. Again, share the information that you are seeing with other peers. Because to end with, we are seeing a lot of new initiatives for big companies, or this new information sharing and threat sharing frameworks that they are using to share information with their peers. But once again, our system was built for small and medium companies, and you don't have to spend time and resources to share data and receive data from your peers. You just run the system, and it's a system that is free and open, and you don't have to spend resources on the systems to work. So from the very beginning, you just receive threat intelligence without spending a lot of money and a lot of resources on getting that capability.
You bet, and thanks a lot, Jaime. And one thing that I'll add, I have this old adage of when I'm talking about to some actually vendors in the security space, when they're small and they're competing with these big companies, it's just like, well, listen, if you're not big, you have to act big, right? And this is an example of another opportunity to allow smaller form factor companies that maybe aren't as secure, focused or mature from a security standpoint, to really leverage, again, not just the misfortune of others, but an information sharing network that helps you get smarter and helps you do things that you couldn't do by yourself. Right? This is not a problem where, now the whole idea of security, like, oh, we can't share information with anybody about our, controls or about any of that stuff. That day's gone, right? That day's gone. I sit with folks that run teams, as Jaime was talking about, 30, 35 people that are just looking at threat intelligence. They have hundreds of people on their security teams, and these guys are collaborating with partners, with competitors, with other organizations to try to get any kind of advantage. So to wrap things up, what I would say is the critical success factor looking forward into 2014 is really to build your farm team, right? And that's what's shown in the picture here. You got to invest in your people. You can't find them, so you're probably going to need to grow them. Right, training internally, looking for high potential folks that may be sysadmins today, maybe developers today, maybe in a non-security role, but have the security mindset, right? They tend to be paranoid. They look at each other, they look over their shoulder before they enter the door. When they do the ATM, they've got, their whole body hunched over to see nobody make sure to see their PIN. They use very strong passwords. I mean, again, these are just indications that somebody may be able to get and capture a security mindset and be able to, in effect, become a security professional, right? And then you want to look at other places, maybe it's the military, maybe it's university programs, again, to find folks to bring into your program and train them well and allow them to, again, grow into the job, because you're not going to find fully formed security folks, or not many of them. So with that, here's some information. Hopefully maybe we have a question. Maybe we can do a question or two here. I know we ran a little bit long, but here's how you can get in touch with me. Here's more information from Alien Vault. So with that, let me hand it back over, and maybe we can do a question or two.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're a little short in time, but we do have a couple quick questions we'd like to get off here really quick, and I am sorry we won't be able to do all these. We do have a live demo on Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, which we'll be able to go through these questions a little bit more in depth, but I'll try to get a couple of these quick ones off here. One of the first ones is participation in OTX mandatory when I use Ossim or USM? And what information is sent to OTX? Should I be worried about exposing sensitive information that might identify my company and therefore provide reputation issues? Can you address that one quickly for us?
Yeah, so basically, if you want to receive threat data from your peers, you have to share data with them. So once you install our product or our Ossim version, the system will ask you if you want to participate on the OTX initiative. So basically, if you participate, you are sharing your data with the other peers, and other peers are sharing data with you. On the other hand, you shouldn't be worried about the data that the system is collecting, because basically it collects raw data. So basically, IP addresses from IPs outside your network, from the internet, and then just pure statistics about attacks and event types that systems in your network are receiving. So we never collect raw payloads that are, so we never collect data from your systems, just statistics and IP addresses from outside your network.
Perfect. One other question here is, do your prevention and detection solutions work effectively on servers hosted in China?
I mean, of course, the country of an IP address of the country where you are running a system is not interfering with this kind of systems, because I think no security company in the world is blocking IP addresses because they are in China or they are performing differently from connections that are coming from China. Of course, in reputation systems, you always use the country as a very low IOC of potential bad behaviors from those IP addresses, but it shouldn't be a big problem.
Perfect. And Mike, this one might be able to get some thoughts from you on as well. Is how would you detect malware in your system if you're not sure and have standard defenses?
Yeah, that's actually a real good question, and I'm always a fan of, God, I say this to my kids all the time, right? Words are cheap, actions mean everything, right? So even if you're not going to be able to detect it, if it doesn't look like, there's malware on the device because none of your traditional tools find it, always look for the behavior of the device, right? And that usually means looking at kind of who it's communicating to or whom, what IP address is, what does that traffic look like? So what you are trying to identify are those indicators of command and control traffic coming from that specific device, right? Listen, there could have something bad on it. It could be dormant. It may not be happening, but, in order to really get a significant determination of compromise on a specific device, you usually wait for that smoking gun, and that smoking gun usually looks like command and control traffic going to known, kind of botnet infrastructures. That's usually a pretty good indication that something's funky with the machine. Obviously, if it's slow, obviously, if there are other, kind of indicators, you may decide to preemptively wipe it. But I know a lot of organizations that do wait for that smoking gun, and that smoking gun looks a lot like command and control traffic.
Right, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Jaime. I think that's probably the last question we're going to be able to get to today, just because of time restraints, and unfortunately there are a number of great questions that have come in. So I do want to thank both of you for coming today, and I want to thank everyone that has joined us for taking the time and sitting on here with us and allowing us to go a few minutes over. So I just want to thank everyone, and hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.
The